So let's talk Michigan football. The season is officially over. The program came out a couple days ago and said they will not be going to a bowl game. So with that, the season is officially a wrap. Final record, 2-4. Obviously, very, very disappointing season. Who knew the highlight of the season would have occurred on the first Saturday for the Big Ten, 10/24, that Saturday where they played Minnesota night game. A lot of people thought early on in the preseason that could be a loss. Minnesota was a top 25 team coming off, I think, an 11-2 2019 season, beating Auburn in a bowl game. And you know what? Michigan, they looked great. They came out, they had a new quarterback in Milton making his first career start, and they looked prepared. They seemed to have a good game plan for Milton. The defense came out with a lot of energy. I remember Kwity Paye and a couple of the other players, they were just foaming at the mouth at the first few series, just blitzing the quarterback. It looked like the old Don Brown defenses. We had a special teams touchdown. If you remember that game, it was pretty nuts. The first quarter, there's a few turnovers and a few, I think, Zach Charbonnet had a 75-yard touchdown on, I think the second snap of the game or something. But that was the highlight of the year. They like I said, they looked good. And then the second week of the season, they took on Michigan State at home on Halloween Day. MSU's coming off of their first game under Mel Tucker, losing to Rutgers, lowly Rutgers. Granted, Rutgers was vastly improved with Greg Schiano taking over and raiding the transfer portal and improving his team of the talent really overnight. But nonetheless, Michigan State lost to Rutgers. And so coming into that second week, Michigan was a huge favorite, not surprisingly. They coming off a top 25 win. MSU was coming off of a loss to Rutgers. So you thought it would be a Michigan win, even if they didn't play well. If it was a 1 or 2 score game, that was going to be, a disappointment. Boy, was that wrong to think. MSU came in there with a solid game plan, had more energy the whole game, and they beat Michigan. And if you remember that game, MSU just kept throwing those routes, those go routes down the sideline. Rocky Lombardi would just throw it up, and it'd either be pass interference on the defensive back, who wouldn't turn around and look at the ball, or they would just hold, or they would complete it. And then on the other end, Michigan's offense, they had nothing. I mean, they were just out of sorts. Complete 180 from that Minnesota game. Milton just did not look comfortable at all. No running game. Nothing. Just some of the 3 and outs were pathetic. You would have Milton just throw it at the feet of the receiver, and it was awful. And so that was at the time, a huge shocker. It turns out later in the year, as things progressed, that, wasn't as big of an upset as it looked at the time. But, so huge upset. So then you go on to play, I think the next weekend they played Indiana, hoping that the loss to Minnesota would have been a fluke. And I think they were favored in Indiana because at that point people still thought, Michigan's good. You had Joe Klatt saying this is their year to compete for a Big Ten title, crap like that. So they were favored against Indiana at that time, and I remember thinking, no way Indiana's going to win. They beat Penn State in a OT thriller. I just, you could see Michigan was trending the wrong way, and sure enough, Indiana, they beat them pretty bad, and maybe it was by 7 or 10, but Michigan got down early, as seems to be a trend, and never recovered. Never felt like Michigan was ever in a position to win. And then followed that up with a loss to Wisconsin, which was just, outside of the Michigan State game, may have been the low light of the year. That was just pathetic. Night game, primetime game. Wisconsin was coming off of COVID issues that a lot of players out. Freshman QB, and I mean that game. You remember that game? That was just that was pathetic. It was lopsided. I don't remember the score. It doesn't matter. It was just bad in every single way possible. So at that point, I think they're 1-3, and writing's on the wall. This year's you're just trying to salvage a three and, just want a winning record at that point. But who they play after that, I can't recall. After the Wisconsin game, I think they went to Rutgers, and actually, it was the same thing at Rutgers until finally Harbaugh decided to pull the trigger. And actually, it was Cade McNamara who came in for the last few drives in Wisconsin, led them to their only touchdown, or it would have been a shutout. And then, Rutgers, I think they get down 17-zip or 16-zip, something, with like 7 or 8 minutes left in the second half. And that was, they may not have scored until Harbaugh finally decided to pull the trigger, take Milton out, and put in Cade McNamara. And, the guy looked great. He was just firing the ball over the place, quick decision-making, getting that ball out of his hand right away, knew exactly where he wanted to go with the ball. Threw a good deep ball, had confidence and swagger out there. Led them to a second half comeback. They went into overtime. Well, the defense, couldn't stop anybody, so they had to go into overtime and just basically get a little lucky with a missed field goal by Rutgers to continue to a second overtime, where they eventually, I think, won in a third overtime. But outside of, that was like the only bright spot outside of that first week against Minnesota. And then they played over Thanksgiving weekend Penn State, and no one knew at the time that'd be the last game. And thank God it was, to be honest with you. But that Penn State game, you thought maybe they could turn it around with a switch at QB. But unfortunately, McNamara went in there, one of the first drives, down at the goal line, tried to sneak it in for a QB touchdown, and then fell on his shoulder, had 2 Penn State guys fall on him, and looked like it was a pretty serious shoulder injury. He went and got treated and tried to come out and continue being the QB, but he just couldn't throw downfield. He could only go lateral, and that just wasn't going to cut it against Penn State. Milton came in and was just not good. And I don't know if you remember that game, but yeah, they had Michigan's team in general had no energy, were just lifeless. I think one of the plays, they tried to sneak it, QB sneak into shotgun, of course. What else would it be? Didn't make it, and it was close, but the players just walked off, whereas, a normal team would try to, stick around and try to push the QB forward, but they were just, obviously their attitude was just get me off of this field as soon as possible. And apparently that's when the COVID outbreak on the team occurred over that Thanksgiving weekend, which led to the cancellation the following week of Maryland. And, thank God they did. They weren't going to beat Maryland. Maryland was going to beat them. And then the week after that, of course, the Ohio State game had to be canceled. And again, thank God for that. Ohio State could have probably come close to hanging 100, to be honest. If they really wanted to, they would have been so motivated. They probably could have got it to 70, 75 maybe, with their starters and Michigan's third stringers, some walk-ons. They made the right decision for several reasons. One, of course, the health and safety of the players, but also just from a competitive standpoint. You don't want that on your record, in the record books forever, where, you got beat 65-3 or something. And it could have been that bad. So, and then, coming full circle, this week they announced that they wouldn't play a bowl game. So they finished at 2-4. And really the mystery of the season really comes down to what happened between the first game, Minnesota, and Michigan State. They really never recovered after that Michigan State game. Something happened. No one knows what it is. Maybe the players do, maybe the coaches do. They're obviously closer to the situation. But so that's a wrap. And so you look forward to the future. And the first thing you got to figure out is who's your head coach. And so that takes us to the Harbaugh situation. And the latest on that, from what I hear, is last Wednesday, they had a 4 to 5 hour meeting, Ward Manuel and Jim Harbaugh. And nothing was resolved. So presumably they'll meet again, and maybe again if they need to, before they're able to come to some sort of resolution. What I think will happen and what I think should happen are two different things. I'll start with what I think should happen, and I've kind of gone back and forth on this, and I've always been a Harbaugh supporter. up into this Michigan State game this year, which I described. That's just an unforgivable loss when you're going against a in-state rival where you should just thrash by 30 to 40. They beat up on you in times when you're going through a coaching transition with Brady Hoke or Rich Rodriguez, and they beat you. And this was our time to repay the favor. Everything was set up for it. We have more talent. We're in the 6th year. We have stability at the coaching position, or at least we should. I'm in the 6th year. And to have a first-year coach take it to you like that is just unforgivable. That's when I started to think that maybe Harbaugh isn't the right coach. And if this thing keeps trending in this direction, maybe there needs to be a switch at the head coach position. Turns out, they didn't recover from that. So ever since that game, just watching the season unfold in the fashion that it did, and the fashion that it did, I mean, just the way they were losing, lack of effort, lack of a game plan, no energy. Players didn't look like they wanted to be out there. Coaches, quite honestly, Harbaugh himself didn't look like he wanted to be out there. You're just pretty much begging. You're not playing for your job. You're not begging. You don't want to hold on to your job. You're no energy. What are you doing between the weeks? I understand there's, COVID issues, so you can't maybe meet in person, but every other team is in the same situation, and those teams don't look like they're not trying. So because of all that, I think you gotta move on. Again, it's really mainly what happened this season, just in the fashion that they lost, combined with some other things that were red flags in prior seasons, specifically not being able to beat Ohio State or any opponent that has similar level of talent as you. So, for example, they're always losing their bowl games outside of that first bowl game to Florida his first year. They lost to Florida State, which they could have won in the Orange Bowl. They lost to Alabama last year. They lost to Florida in another bowl game where they just got destroyed. So they're not even competitive in a lot of these games, and that's really a reflection of the coaching staff, I think. So my final verdict is you do have to part ways, whether that's a buyout of Harbaugh's last year or you just do a mutual parting of ways. So either way, you kind of get to the same conclusion. And you look for another coach. There's a few out there, starting with Matt Campbell. That name's been thrown out there. Who knows what his situation is? Maybe he wants to stay at Iowa State. Probably not. But he'd probably potentially on the surface be a good candidate. You have Fickle. He's obviously a Ohio State guy, so there's those issues. But, yeah. So that's what I think will happen. Well, that's what I think should happen. That he shouldn't come back and should look for a new coach. What will happen? I think Ward Manuel likes him. He said that it's been on record on multiple occasions. He wants him to retire, the head coach, want this to be his final coaching stop, which, sounded all good before this year, sort of good. But I think this year really changes the conversation there. But I don't think Ward Manuel will pull the trigger on that. I think they figure out a way to bring him back. The fact that they even had a 4 or 5 hour discussion means there's interest on both sides to make it work out. If one side just didn't want to make it work out, and that's truly what they wanted, they wouldn't have had a 4 or 5 hour conversation. I think if both parties are honest with themselves, like I said before, they would both figure out that this isn't the right fit. Harbaugh, I think, knows this isn't the right fit. I think he's got to know that he can't get over the hump, and he's probably not the right guy to do it. I think he knows that. And I think Ward Manuel knows that Jim Harbaugh's not the right coach to kind of take him to that next level of winning championships. But like I said, obviously there's mutual interest in both parties to try to work it out. So I think that's what will happen. They figure out a way to extend his contract 3 or 4 years. I think the buyout will be one thing they're discussing. Of course, Michigan doesn't want a large buyout because really I think if he does come back, it's a 1-year contract. He's got to compete for a Big Ten title and be more competitive. this next year, or he doesn't get a chance for the following year. So, and Michigan doesn't want to be on the hook for a 20 plus $30 million buyout in these difficult financial times for universities and sports, the athletic departments. So that's got to be one sticking point. And then the other, I'm sure, is the compensation structure. Harbaugh clearly, for the job he's done, is overpaid. I think he's the third or fourth highest paid coach, somewhere around $8 or $9 million a year, and he's giving results of top 20, 25 maybe. So there's just an imbalance there that needs to be fixed. And I don't think Harbaugh, with the ego he has, and no one's going to be happy with taking a substantial pay cut. That's just a hit to the ego. So we'll see if they can overcome those hurdles. I think they probably figure out a way to make it happen, and really, then you're onto a 1-year contract, really. And so then you turn your attention to 2021. They signed a pretty good recruiting class, and I think you're going to need some of those players there. You're going to probably need J.J. McCarthy, Xavier Worthy, Donovan Edwards. You're going to need them to come in, make an impact their first year if you're going to want to turn things around. So surprisingly, they held on to that recruiting class. I think it was ranked anywhere between 11 and 13 nationally, which is pretty good. But as we've seen before, that doesn't mean anything. The teams that are making the CFP winning titles, they're consistently recruited in the top 10, top 5 most of the time. So Michigan's proven they can't take top 10 to 15 recruiting classes and develop that talent. They need the talent. So if he comes back, then I guess the next question is, what are the changes you make specifically on the assistant coach front, the coaching staff? So I think the writing's on the wall for Don Brown. There's even been discussions that Harbaugh has potentially reached out to the Vanderbilt coach, the former Vanderbilt coach, Mason. I don't know, I forget his first name, who he worked with at Stanford. So I think, that tells you maybe that's nothing substantiates that, but I think the writing's on the wall for Don Brown. If he has superior talent, his scheme works pretty well, but he just hasn't been able to figure out or even slow down teams that have, the same talent or more talent. I mean, in those teams, we've watched the games. Those teams can't be stopped, but you got to find a way to slow them down. Get a turnover, get a stop once in a while to give your team a chance. But just the explosive plays that he lets up against those teams with his man-to-man coverage and his aggressive style. You got to at least keep the ball in front of you. He just hasn't been able to figure that out. He says he plays more zones, but whatever it is, he hasn't been able to figure out a way to slow down the more high-powered teams to allow Michigan to at least have a chance to keep it close and win. They've been blowouts. So he's more than likely gone. Josh Gaddis, that's an interesting situation. Let's just be honest, he was a bad hire. Harbaugh has a propensity to do that. He found Don Brown with a Google search. I think he Googled him, and his defense was number 1 in 2014 at Boston College. So when you're doing that, you're not even looking at fit. You're just literally bringing in a guy who had the number 1 defense at Boston College. That's all you're doing. You're not looking at fit, how your personalities are going to mesh together, what kind of recruiter he's going to be, anything like that. It's just, okay, he had a good defense at Boston College. Did the same type of thing with Josh Gaddis, called him. I think they had 1 telephone conference, from what I understand, before he put a contract in front of him. Young guy, inexperienced guy from a play calling perspective, never called plays in his life. And, now he's running Michigan's offense, instilling a new spread offense from Harbaugh's kind of power look. And, no surprise, it was a disaster his first year. If you remember that first Middle Tennessee State game, the calling was it was a potpourri of plays. Nothing made sense. There's no, the next play didn't complement the next play you're going to call, the one you called before it. It was just literally spinning a wheel and throwing it and, running just random plays that didn't connect. into any sort of game plan. And, that's to be expected from a first-time play caller. It showed. But, when you're Harbaugh and you're Michigan, you got to do better than that. You got to do more due diligence and get in a guy that fits the culture, or at least has, have some confidence, can put together a game plan. He just wasn't able to do that. Now, he got better his first year. This has been 2019. That Penn State game in the second half, and then I think the next week was the Notre Dame game with the rain game. And that was phenomenal. That may have been the highlight of the last couple of years. And so he's gotten improved. And even this year, the first game against Minnesota, good game plan, looked great. But ever since then, it was just been a complete disaster. I mean, you can't fall off that hard and far. So, the jury's still out on him. Unfortunately, you've recruited a specific system. He's brought in some of his guys to fit his system, these smaller speed and space type guys. And I think if this is, everyone knows Harbaugh, and everyone knows that next year's big. So you got to keep Gaddis for that reason. You gotta keep him and just hope he continues to improve. But you got to hope he improves, and some of those recruits he brought in help, and he's able to kind of get better as a play caller. I'm not confident, but I think he stays, bottom line. And then other parts of the coaching staff, I really don't know. Jay Harbaugh, he's a great recruiter. Does he have experience, as a running back? No, of course not. Maybe he's better suited as a special teams guy. But again, I'll give him credit. He does recruit well, so all the credit to him there. He's brought in a lot of good players at the running back position. Ben McDaniel's QB coach. Something needs to happen there. The QB situation is just dreadful. But no one's been able to fix that. Harbaugh himself, I think, was the QB coach. He didn't do anything with John O'Korn, Brandon Peters. He brought in Pep Hamilton, paid him $1 million. He did absolutely nothing. Ben McDaniels has done nothing with the QBs. That's obviously a huge position you got to get right. You look around the country, that's one of the primary differences is the QB position. So who knows? Who knows what you do there? At the other positions, who knows? No clue. You need a shakeup, though. Probably, you got Bob Shoop. Who knows what happened with him? It's probably something really weird. But, you got guys like Daxton Hill, who's thinking about Alabama, and then he comes to Michigan, and he's got no positions coach for a full year, his sophomore year. That guy's got a ridiculous amount of talent. Obviously, he has the NFL aspiration and has the talent. And you're going to give him no positions coach for a full year? He should transfer just to teach him a lesson, be like, what is this? This is a joke. I wouldn't blame him if Daxton Hill left. The big change will probably be on defense. Probably gets maybe some reshuffling, or find a couple guys that aren't back with the program. Who knows? But that's kind of, we'll just have to wait and see. That'll be the big thing, what they do with Harbaugh if he comes back. And then if he comes back, what changes he makes to his coaching staff. So that's kind of really the next things to watch out for. So that's that. I'll probably post another video once we find out more information around the coaching situation. Just one other thing I want to give my thoughts on. So the conference championship weekend, you're like me, you're locked down. There's not a ton to do. So you probably watch at least I do, watch a lot of sports, eat a lot of greasy food. So watch a lot of the conference championship games, starting with the Big Ten game. Just not impressed with Ohio State. And that's another thing. If Michigan could have somehow put out some semblance of a team, you could have beat Ohio State. They're not, we saw them play Northwestern. They're not unbeatable. They weren't that good. They were going to have some COVID issues. You would have had some COVID issues. You could have beat, had Michigan stayed healthy and didn't have the COVID situation, that was a beatable team. You saw them play. They were nothing special. Fields is obviously the difference maker. He's the only guy that he kind of puts them over the edge. He can extend plays on third down and keep drives alive. So I'll give him that. He's tough to stop, no doubt. And he's the only reason they really beat Northwestern. Well, obviously, Sermon had an incredible game, so I don't want to take away from him. But you look at that, their defense isn't special. I'm just not impressed with Ohio State. We're not a vintage Ohio State team, but as they always tend to do, they figure out a way to win. That's just what they've been doing for a long time. And Saturday was no different. Northwestern, they didn't deserve to be there. Good for them. They made it there through the West, which had its issues. There really wasn't a great team in the West. So, not impressed with Ohio State, but tell you who I was impressed with, Clemson. So the ACC championship rematch of Notre Dame and Clemson. And I thought Notre Dame would keep it close. I didn't think they would win because Clemson had so much more to play for, and they had their quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, back. But it was a blowout. They looked good. They were firing on all cylinders. They just dominated Notre Dame. And they just looked fantastic. And then the SEC championship game, Alabama, who I think is the best team in the country, I thought going into it, I thought they would handle Florida pretty handily. And I have to give Florida credit. They hung in there. They traded blow for blow with Alabama. It really was a one-score game. Kyle Trask was impressive. Pitts, the tight end, and a couple other playmakers Florida has. They kept it close. Alabama, and Nick Saban said it after the game, they're going to have to outscore teams. He's, kind of a subtle shot at their defense that they're just going to have to kind of try to outscore teams, which they did. So Alabama, they look good. Their defense, had some issues, but to me, they're the best team, followed by Clemson. And then who knows, 3 and 4, who knows, like I said. Ohio State and Notre Dame, not horribly impressive. But, one thing you notice there is, one, the effort level is just on high, even during this COVID season. Obviously, they're playing for a lot, but still, their effort and their energy is just at a different level than anything you've seen from Michigan this whole year outside of that Minnesota game. And then secondly, it's the QB situation. And they all have very strong, the 4 teams in the CFP have good QB situations. And Michigan, they've been lacking that for a long time. I think you got to go back probably to maybe Denard Robinson, where you actually had a difference maker at the QB position. That's that. My whole opinion of the CFP is that it's a broke. You need to find a better way to do that. It's an invitation. A bunch of people sit in a room and decide who deserves, not even who deserves, who are the 4 best teams. It's not even about what you do on the field. All the tiebreakers go to the team with the best reputation, who recruits the best, who's got the most brand recognition. A team like Cincinnati will never get a chance. Tiebreakers between an A&M and a Notre Dame. A&M will have no chance for that every year. We've seen it time in and time out. Teams like TCU, they get left out. Again, it's because it's an invite. You got people sitting in a room have never played football trying to decide who the 4 best teams are. It's just a ridiculous way to do it. You need to figure out a better way to do it. It can be done. It's just the current way it isn't the right way to do it. So that's about it. The CFP games will be played here in 2 weeks, New Year's Day. I think the championship game a week later. So looks like they'll find a way to finish the season unless something crazy happens. So overall, glad they did get the season in. It was obviously a weird season that one of which we'll never see in our lifetimes again. At least I hope not. But they found a way to get it in, and they'll crown a champion here in 3 weeks. So that's good. And then, like I said, kind of just a wait-and-see mode with Michigan and their coaching situation. So, I'll probably post something once there's more news on that front. So that's it for now.